Hey, what's going on, everybody? I am streaming today to kind of recap a little class I did with really a one-on-one I did with a friend of mine who's starting to kind of learn production and everything. And I just wanted to throw out the stream because I felt like I had some good stuff to share with her, and feel like it should be presented out to everybody else who's kind of learning production and things like that. So I'm in Ableton Live 9 Suite. So excited for the Ableton 10. I'm ready. I've got the beta. I'm working on transitioning, but for the sake of everybody who doesn't have Live 10, I'll still use Live 9, even if some people have Live 9. This is solely sample making. There's not a whole lot of songwriting or arrangement going on in this stream, but solely just kind of tips and tricks for working with samples, what you can do with them, and just some extra techniques for creating your own sound library. So to get started, I've got a session, brand new session, a couple audio tracks to work with. Again, we're only working with audio samples. And I'm just going to go into my sample library. I'm going to pick a one shot. We can start with making anything really. You can turn like a cymbal one shot into a build-up effect, which I can do right now, actually. If I can find a cymbal. Drums, cymbal. I like that one. So it's a quick sample. It's not, the sample itself could technically be, an impact or a build-up, especially if you just go into the track view, into the sample view anyway, and click reverse. You can transition into a portion of the track real quick, whatever. But in this instance, I want to keep just the original sound, but I also want to make my own. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple audio effects to this to kind of lengthen the sample, give it some more build up or drop off. A couple things we can do is we can use a reverb to get a tail of some sort. I'm really going to take off all of the processing. I don't really need the processing too much. The only thing I'm really going to worry about, I'm likely going to take the pre-delay off. There doesn't need to be really much of a gap, because if I think about it as more of a riser effect, I don't want the pre-delay to be like a little clip off and then the actual sample. I want it to impact as soon as possible. And then the decay time is really what we're going to focus on to figure out how long we want the tail to be. And there's kind of a drop off. So because the sample's so short, if we compress this a little bit, we can kind of even out the transition here. I kind of want to keep the transient a little bit, so I might bring the attack up just a little bit. Perfect. So now what we can do with that is simply go to the track, right click or control click for Mac, freeze the track. And then from here we can do one of two things. we can select the highlighted portion, including this kind of lined out, because this is the tail. All the reverb fills up that space, and we can control or command click drag, and you can drag it to a new audio track. It retains the old track, all your processing, everything like that, and just gives you a brand new sample that you can consolidate, which is Control or Command J. Consolidate that, and now you have your own sample. Or if you just want to commit to it and don't care, then just flatten it, and it gives you the exact same thing. And again, it'll break down the portion in which there's the original sample, and then it'll give you the rest of the tail as well. So in order to create just one sample, you just consolidate it and you're good to go. The cool thing is that now, we had our original sound here, right? That's part of my sample library. But what I can do now is go into my current project under my process samples here, things that I've consolidated, and there are my new sounds. I can go in and rename these, so I could say impact symbol 1, right? And then I can drag from my current project into my samples file, and I can just throw it in my cymbal crashes. Technically it's an impact, so I'll throw it in there. Boom, done. To make things even better, I'll shorten it to a 4-bar loop ish, 4-bar sound. I'll crop it, and then I'll reverse it. So again, in the sample view, hit reverse, and now as I play it, it's more of a build up. Perfect. I like that. Even better, let's reverse it again. And I like the idea of the build up, but I also kind of like the idea of maybe throwing on some delay to give it kind of like a back, like a ping pong delay to kind of give it some back and forth movement. Of course, it would help if the ping pong delay had some effect to it, right? Give some feedback. Maybe a little too I don't really want it to be wet immediately, so I'll give it I'll show some modulation here and give it some modulation on the sample itself and play it out. That didn't really do anything. Correction. Let's just show the automation here and here. See what that does. No? Just not enough impact? I guess not. Huh. There we go. I messed something up. Let's try this again. There we go. That's better. Kind of like the idea of it building into so let's freeze this again, And I'm gonna do the click. Excuse me. I'm gonna do the click drag because I want to keep it just in case I need to change something. If I don't like exactly how it sounds. Consolidate it. Reverse the sample. Solo this because that's all I want to hear right now. And just see how it builds up and rises. Yeah, I kind of like that. I might compress it a little bit just to give those transient sounds they're kind of, the peaks are a little too much for me. Still a little too much for me. Yeah, that'll work. And I'll just freeze and flatten that. Yeah, I know. So now I have my finished rise, I guess you could say. If you rename it, so symbol rise, just say 1. Alright. If I crop it after that, under my current project, under my crops, there's symbol rise 1. Bam, there's my samples. Where are my rise effects? I know I have some. No? No? Fills? No? No. I'll just put it in there. For now. Oh. Yeah, they are. Anyway. So, simple things you could do with just adding an effect. Kind of tweaking the effect to get out of it what you want, as far as like a transitional effect, you know, with reverb, delay, that kind of stuff. Adding them to like short samples, like cymbals. You can even do it to like we can do it to like a stab. We'll take this stab here, get rid of all this, unfreeze this, show flatten it, just make it dead silence. Unsolo. So let's say I don't really want the transient much, so we can go into our envelopes. If you don't have that envelope open, it's this little E down here, show hide envelopes box, and then you can do your modulation envelopes here. And I'm just doing the volume modulation, and I'm gonna take the first beat and I'm going to create a ramp up. I don't know why I looped that. Okay, and I don't really want the tail end of that, so I'm kind of just going to do a ramp down as well. I'm going to cut this off. I'm just gonna do about halfway. Yeah, I'll do all the way. I don't want that click. Even though I'm getting the click, what's going on here? Okay, cool. So if I were to crop that, or rather freeze it and flatten it, then you get the actual sound. Alright, I'll keep that. Anytime you make a change and then freeze and flatten it, it will show you the audio will change to show you what it actually looks like, and then from there you can add your effects. So I'll just use my trusty ping pong delay. I'll do 3s, and I'll just keep it on. Alright. Okay, perfect. Let's freeze and flatten that. So now we've got this. You can just take the tail, right? You don't even have to use the original sound. You just take the tail and put it somewhere. Or you can even reverse it, you know, in the sample mode. Boom. Better yet, take that tail, put the original chord on, and then make a copy of the tail, re-reverse it, and I have a build-up too. Simple transition stuff. Vocals. Oh man, anytime you have like a singer leading up into like the beginning of a acapella or, you know, sample or whatever, and pick a good one. Oh, and if you want to combine these together just to be one, all you got to do is group these. Take an audio track, take the input from the group, record arm. Let's mute this for a second, and then hit record, and it'll play through both sounds. Let it play out. Stop recording. And now you got your single sample here. You can get rid of the group, and then you got your one sound. Done. Just remember, depending on how you have your song, or, you know, whatever, that this is probably the point, you know, like the midpoint where you're gonna have the downbeat of the next portion of your song. It's not going to be the very beginning of the sample kind of thing. And I would typically cut this to be about like something like this, and then I can, you know, cut it on the beat. That way I can as I'm positioning the sample, I can lock it to a bar. Things like that. And then just crop it. That'll kind of, you know, basically just finalize your finished project or finished sample, and then under your crop portion you can, here's your 5 audio, you know, rename that to be chord step. Do BU for, I do BU for build up, and BD for breakdown. So it's both, right? So, and it looks like it's in D, so I'll throw that in D. Oh, you know what? It won't let me do it. Let me get rid of it. Even if you delete the sample out of your project, every time we start a new project, it saves a temporary project folder with everything you've done. So that sample's still there despite the fact that you got rid of it out of your project. So in case you like accidentally delete something, as long as you have the temporary project file, you won't have to worry about losing some of your sounds. So again, this is chord step, build up, breakdown in D, and then now I can throw that in my samples. Just throw it into my custom effects. No, samples. Yeah, I'll just throw it in there. vocals. So, you know, we got this.
And only you.
So,
And only you.
let's take that real quick.
Only you.
And what we can do is we can take a small snippet, right? And I'm just going to take that. I'm actually going to duplicate it because I want to freeze and flatten that part. And again, I'm gonna kind of well, I'm gonna crop it first so I can see the actual sound here in this part. And I'm gonna do exactly what I was doing earlier with the envelope. So get my clip volume. I don't know why it's not letting me use envelopes. Oh, it's because it's not warped. There we go. Okay. You can't use envelopes if it's not warped. Just FYI. So I'm going to cut, kind of make a drop off here. And I'm going to do it so it doesn't clip. I'm just going to solo this real quick. And play it out. Okay. I just need a quick stab. And I'm going to grab a reverb again. And throw it on there. Again, just getting rid of all of this. And I want a really long decay time. I mean, not terribly long, but a decent amount. You know, 10 seconds is good. No pre-delay. And you change the size. The size will change the timbre. And then you want that 100% wet. Okay. So what we're going to do is freeze and flatten, and then we're going to mash up the reverse portion of this after I consolidate it. Duh. Put it in position, hit reverse. And then now you have kind of a rising lead up into that word. Oh.
Only you.
You hear that a lot in songs where they'll take like the kind of the first word and they'll just wash it out with a reverb like this, and then it's a nice transitional to the impact of the actual word, instead of it being such an abrupt, you know, like she's screaming out only you. It's very abrupt, so having something like this,
Only you.
it's a nice bleed in, and it's a little soft, honestly, so you can kind of,
Only you.
you can even go a little crazy with it. I like to add an auto pan, just a little bit of an auto pan. In fact, what I'll do too is I'll automate it so that as it builds up, it's slowly panning.
Only you.
That's a good one. That's one of my favorite things to do with transitional effects, is get a little auto pan going and like to add to the build up, and then it bleeds into the actual sound. And then again, if I want, I'm not going to keep it, but well, I'll freeze and flatten this at least. That's kind of cool, in my opinion. Done.
Only you.
And the nice thing too is that even just that sound out of context could you know, I could get rid of that vocal entirely, and it's still a good sample to use completely out of context, right? Because I could, you know, it's a transitional, it's got some it has a pitch to it, right? So it's, you could pitch it down or up, and you know, to fit your song or whatever. You know, if for some reason it was, you know, happened to be 6 semitones off, right? And the other thing too is I like I like making these exactly the length that I need to, so that later on when I'm applying them, I don't have to worry about trying to line them up. They just fit with the bar. So sample doesn't really start until right about there, so I can chop this off and I'm done. Cool. Now I can rename this really quick. Fox build up 1. I'll crop it. And save it. Current project. There it is. Throw out my samples. And I'm done. There it is.
To the Batmobile. Let's go. To the Batmobile. Let's go.
Random Batmobile sample. Anyway, as far as sample making, kind of, you know, doing things like that, there's so many things you can do. You know, you can take a loop. And you can even just chop each individual part of the loop. Right? Even better, you can slice it to a new MIDI track. I tend to do per transient. Gives you built-in, and then you've got, you know, something to play with. You can even, with this MIDI track, you can actually, you know, it's a MIDI sequence now, so you can organize it and play around with the samples, create a new melody with it. You know, nothing super fancy, but I guess I could just loop this. And you just take one sample. Let's take a beat real quick. Oh, I see what I did there. Let's take a drum loop. Just a simple drum loop. And now I can slice this up. If you hit the little MIDI editor preview button right here, sample note, whatever, you can get an idea of what you're playing. Just that alone as a loop. That's a really, really easy way to take a loop and chop it up, sample wise. You can even go a little deeper. You know, I'm only using slice 8, 7, 2, and 1. So I got slice 8, and if I open it up, there's that little portion. Now I can process it a little differently, so I can, like, if I want, I could throw a chorus on there or something. And now every time I play slice 8, now let's do like do something else like a delay, or oh, let's actually give it some saturation. Things like that. And then if you were to, you know, you could do something similar to your, you know, individually by, you know, if you have a loop, like a drum loop like this, if you don't like, you know, parts of it, let's say, let's add a top here. Let's take this, right? If you go into the sample view and then you go into envelopes, you can, you know, automate volume to kind of chop up parts that you don't want. So as I play this, oops. What did I just do? something like that. You know, you can kind of tweak the loop a little bit to fit what you want. You know, it's while it's a groove in itself, you can make it a little more your own, in the sense of, okay, well, I don't like this little, like, you know, pitched tom, so I'll get rid of that. You know, it sounds kind of weird with just one cut, so I'll throw in another cut, but then I'll let the rest of the loop play out. You know, and it kind of works, right? Because, like, you know, if you mix it down a little bit so it's more background than forefront, you know, it kind of blends in with the other drum loop, and adds a little flavor to it. The other thing too is, like, the full drum loop at the top doesn't really have that great of a hi-hat. So if I even wanted to, I could take the hat of, you know, just the loop, and I'm taking an audio track, and I'll just chop this. And get it on the ups. Now, one thing to note with, if you do a sample like this where you know you're copying the same thing, definitely mix it down and give it some you can do one of two things. You can give it some delay to kind of offset so it doesn't impact at the same time, sounds a little different, but it'll sound phasey. The other thing you can do to avoid that is to pan a couple things left and right, you know, like so. I've got the top loop kind of a little left. I'm gonna hit this a little right. It's just so that they don't sit directly on top of each other. And the other thing you can do too is you can detune the pitch a tiny bit. You don't want to do it too much, because then you're actually changing the pitch. But if it's just slightly detuned, then there's nothing wrong with it. I'm just gonna freeze everything and flatten it all. And the other actually, you know what I'm gonna do too is I'm going to add a little bit of a reverb, just so we have something. With this one, I'm not creating that transitional effect, so I kind of want a little bit of pre-delay and a bit of a decay. I'm also adding the effect on top of the sample, so I want it mostly dry. I don't want it to be too wet, because then if it's too wet, it's drowned out. So the only time you really want an effect 100% wet is if you do want that drowned out, or you're putting it on a return track. Which actually, you know what? I will put this on a return track. I'm going to take this reverb, put it on the return, and then I'm going to send this cymbal and the drum loop to the same reverb, so that I hear it all through the reverb. And now, because it's on the return, I want it 100% wet, because the return channel is its own separate affected channel. kind of layered on top of everything. So this is the soloed version. The other thing I can do with this is I can process it differently. So if I want, I can filter out the lows before they even hit the reverb, because, you know, reverberating low end is just asking for it to be muddy. And then I can compress it a little bit to kind of, you know, bring it out a little bit more. Even maybe saturate it a tiny bit. Here's a cool thing. If I want some of these drum slices to go, it's easier to do it in the mix channel, but I could send audio. I believe I can send audio too. Maybe not. Just kidding. Never mind. I thought you could send them to the return track as well. So lots of things you can do with samples and a combination of samples and effects to kind of create, you know, your own library. First off, with your own transitional effects, you know, you can do bass sounds too, and little snippets of bass sounds of, you know, chops for your drop. If you're kind of into bass heavy music, you know, I don't really cover that stuff, so but it's a concept that you can apply anyway. And then, you know, taking drum loops, using envelopes to kind of shift how you want the track or the, you know, the loop to be, change it up so that, you know, it's not the exact drum loop that you're using, but something similar, kind of tweaking it a little bit to make it your own. And then also, if you're, you know, feeling like something's missing or you want to add to it, or pronounce it a little bit, you know, chopping it up, putting it into its own new track, you know, giving it some track delay, or you know, panning it a little bit, or even, you know, detuning the sample a little bit to give it, you know, some variation with its counterpart. That way they're not just sitting right on top of each other, just exponentially and getting louder solely because they're literally layered on top of each other. Speaking of layers, one last thing I'll cover, you can create your own new one-shot samples with layers. So let's say I want a couple of like a new clap or something. I mean, we kind of do layers with, you know, having multiple loops. You know, I've got this drum loop, right? And this is doing one thing. I mean, it's providing a kick and it's providing a bit of a hat, but it's not that great of a hat in comparison, right? And then you've got this layer here, which, in fact, I'm just going to group these so I can process them, you know, together. Throw a compressor on there. I shall throw a glue on there. Oh no. There we go. think with these, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to consolidate this, and I'm going to compress this track by itself. Sorry, tangent. Kind of want to keep this. Don't like that. Yeah, that's better. Okay. So layers. You can take the best way of doing layers is, in my opinion anyway, take an audio effect rack. My default audio effect rack throws a dry wet on there, so I'm actually going to get rid of those. And just all of that. Right, so you want to create a couple chains here, and in them you want a simpler, which is an instrument, not audio effect. Oh, my bad. Let's change that up. Let's do it instrument rack on a MIDI channel. Oh my god. Sorry. Okay. Fail. Okay. Let's throw in a couple simplers. Alright. And you can also do this in a drum rack too, which I'll show you again, but I like simpler. There's some things you can do with simpler and its counterpart sampler that, you know, are really cool. But and again, drum rack is really just simpler. So this kind of just, think of this as one drum rack cell. Alright. Anyway, so we'll take a few samples here. I'm going to make a clap. So I kind of like the tail end of this. Right. I like that. It's got a, you know, quick transient. This is a good one too. Good body, right? And I'm gonna process them, because if I play them all together, make sure so this is on a loop, so I don't want that. I just want the one shot. Now I can mix them. And I'll even fade this out a little bit. Even those just layered by themselves are kind of decent, honestly. I mean, if you were to solo each one individual, there's one, there's two, there's three. Together they make their, you know, own unique kind of clap sound, right? But just in case I don't really want to have conflicting frequencies, so I'll throw in an EQ8 on this. This is the tail, right? Obviously it's producing some low end. We don't want that at all in general. But then I'm going to throw an EQ8 on each other track and kind of look at what they're producing here. Cut that out too. So this sample is kind of peaking right here around what? 1.5. And then this sound kind of fills up the 900 to 2.5 range, right? So I'll do the 1.5. I'm just gonna notch this part off slightly, like 3 dB. So I did that on the tail end, right? I like that. And then on the more bodied clap, I'm gonna take an EQ curve. Ooh. Let's add one. I'm gonna make it right at 1.5, and I'm gonna make it a really sharp Q and notch it off a couple dB. Alright, because this is where that transient's gonna pop out above everything else. And I can even boost it a little bit too. And now I have that full bodied clap. I get the quick peak of that original, you know, this middle sample. Get the rest of the body out of this sample, and then you get the tail end, which isn't too long. Right, and then what I can do here is I can go on my 2s and 4s, you know, highlight a portion of the track. I know it's Control-Shift-M to create a MIDI clip. C3 will play the same pitch of the sample, so that's the trigger we want to use. If you hit the B key, it's a pencil tool, so I can just quickly click on C3 on each one of these. I can even fold it just to make my life easier. And then on top of that, if I like what I have done, freeze and flatten. And now I have the sampled version of that clap. And I can rename this clap loop. I'll do homemade clap loop 1, and now current project. I'll just crop it just for the sake of doing it, and there it is. Can throw that at my drums and my loops. It's more of a top, right? It's just a clap, so save for later. So I hope this hour-long-ish video of kind of going through some samples and you know what you can do with just simple samples, so add some effects, changing things up, you know, freeze, flatten. Every time you freeze and flatten, it creates a copy of that in your current project folder in your temporary file, so you can go back and, you know, as long as, so like if I want to close out this project, right, it's going to give me, do you want to save any changes? And if I do, then yeah, I'll save the changes. You know, and then after it exports everything, it's also going to ask me, would you like to delete the temporary files in, you know, where your temporary file projects are? And if you do that, you delete everything that all the samples you created. If you don't, if you leave them in place, what you can do is you can go back to that in your Finder or File Explorer or whatever. For me, it's in my data drive under Ableton, live recordings, and then here's all of my temporary projects. And I can go back inside of them, and open them up. And once I, open those, it'll open up a project or not. Supposed to. It's supposed to give you something like this where you have all your process samples, things like that. But I guess mine's failing miserably. There we go. So we got all the... I did not want GIMP. I don't know why it started GIMP. Dumb. So the idea is that there's supposed to be a sample file. So really this temp project's useless to me, so I can delete it. This one's useless to me, so I can delete it. Here's all the samples from this one. Looks like it's empty. I stole them all. You can go through all your temporary files and make sure you have all your consolidated, all your crops out. So like, this sample I didn't take, recorded, all that stuff. So I can go through and periodically through my temporary files, clean them out, move all those samples into another folder, go through them, organize them, see if I want them, delete them if I don't, things like that. And over time, you go through all of everything that you've done, and even though at the time you didn't like it, maybe later on you did, or you take some of these techniques that you've learned today and apply them differently later down the road with some of the things that you've used, then yeah, absolutely, it's always good to have. The more samples you have, the better, right? Because you can just choose and pick later on and have them for however long you decide to keep them or save them. And a lot of times samples take up some space, but if you have like 4 terabytes of hard drive space, then what's it to you, right? Thanks for joining me. Definitely check out some of my future videos. Check me out on Facebook, SoundCloud. More things to come for sure, as far as tutorials, music, streams, all that stuff. So hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you. Have a good day.